Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. So this video I'm going to be talking about Resident Evil and the future of the franchise. It's not going to be a review like some previous videos. I'm going to be talking generally, but I will also be talking about the Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 remakes, and just give a few of my thoughts on those games. So just some brief history between myself and the franchise. Resident Evil 2, as it stands, is my second favourite game of all time. As if you've watched my previous videos, you know that Ocarina of Time is the first on my list, but ironically Resident Evil 2 is second place. Now it seems to be a running theme with me that I play the second game in the series first before I play the first one. I'd played and completed Resident Evil 2 long before I even played Resident Evil 1. I originally played the PC port of the game because I didn't actually own a PlayStation at the time. However, my friend had a PlayStation and he had Resident Evil 1, 2 and 3 at the time, because I believe this was in the year 2000. So even as a young kid, I was playing games that, you know, I probably shouldn't have been playing. But when you look back, it's not surprising that these games were incredibly popular, especially with my generation. The voice acting, the story itself, are pretty much cheese personified. But it's not cheesy in the bad sense, it's cheesy in a charming way. Resident Evil 1 is kind of towing the line, being that charming and just cheesy for bad production value cheesy. But when it came to Resident Evil 2, they actually hired voice actors. And yes, some of the performances are a little bit over the top, but all in all, good performances, especially from Alison Court and Sally Cahill, who played Claire and Ada respectively. But since playing, even as a kid, I'd always had this unwavering love for Resident Evil 2. I just loved the story, I loved the characters, and I was always holding out hope once more consoles got released that we'd someday see a release or remaster of Resident Evil 2. And in 2015, that became a reality. It was announced, and then we heard nothing for 2 years. And then at E3 we finally saw footage of the game, and the reception was overwhelmingly positive. I'd kept hope that the remake was going to be a faithful remake, in the sense that it was going to be tank controls and fixed camera angles. However, when it was revealed it was going to be from the Resident Evil 4 mechanics, I wasn't all too bothered. Now, I have my problems with Resident Evil 4, but controls are not one of them. Sometimes they can be a little bit clunky, especially if you're replaying them on newer systems, but the remakes of 2 and 3 have seemingly perfected the controls for that. After the release of Resident Evil 7, I was kind of nervous for the future of the franchise. I wasn't all too impressed with the first person perspective of Resident Evil 7. Don't get me wrong, it's a good game. I just don't think that it's a series that should be in first person, and that's just my opinion. I don't think it's a series where it's supposed to be the player in that experience. We are playing these characters' stories, and that's how it's always been. However, with the teaser trailer and the information coming about Resident Evil 8, it looks like that we're returning back to the first person perspective. But the remakes have kind of proved to Capcom, at least, and a wider audience, that Resident Evil still has the potential to be a horror franchise. It isn't just a cheesy action franchise that 5 and 6 kind of made it appear to be. And going back to my problems with 4, I think, again, it's just my opinion, I know Resident Evil 4 is a very popular game. Resident Evil 4 is kind of to blame for all this. It was the birth of QuickTime events and the action taking hold over the horror in the franchise, and it was popular. At the time, yes, it was really popular. But I think as time has gone on, more people have kind of realised that this is not what we want in a Resident Evil game. We want survival horror back. And they really played into that in the remakes and really proved in the current climate that survival horror games can still work. People do want to play that kind of experience. They want to be scared and feel like that they are in a desperate struggle to survive in these games. Now, we won't be going too deep into the stories of each of the games, as I'm pretty sure most people know the stories anyway at this point, because I'm planning to do a series a little bit later on in retrospect of each individual game and doing the similar for the Silent Hill franchise. But as a long-standing fan, I can see the criticism that was landed on the game, that they kind of half-assed the A and B scenario, and it's hard to disagree with that. However, overall, I think the overall experience is really top-notch. I do wish that the A and B scenarios were different, but I do just wish some of the puzzles were different in each scenario. I know the locker combinations are pretty much identical, which kind of does make sense in a realistic sense, but it just seems that when you're playing the B scenario, that no one was there before you, and the whole point is that you're tailing the other character. So if you're playing as Claire first, in Leon B, Claire has taken some supplies, and you're kind of taking the scraps to make it harder. Whereas the remakes, it kind of just seems that it's in another dimension. Like, it doesn't seem that the other character's been there before. And you don't really interact with them other than the 2 cutscenes that they have. But all in all, that is my only nitpick on the game. And like I said, I'm not doing a review of this one, but my reception of it was overwhelmingly positive on the whole. Now, when it comes to Resident Evil 3, Evil 3 for me was always kind of the afterthought. I never massively loved the story. It just kind of felt like it was an add-on for 2, but obviously Claire and Leon weren't in it. You were playing back as Jill. But arguably, Resident Evil 3 introduced the most iconic character in the franchise. So it introduced Nemesis, and probably people who are not fans of the franchise have probably seen a picture of Nemesis and know who he is. So when the remake was announced, people were obviously excited. I, for one, wasn't particularly hopeful about the remake because I knew I was going to buy it and I knew I was going to play it, but Resident Evil 3 for me is not really in my top 10 games. I enjoyed it, but I just don't see it as good as the previous games at all. Resident Evil 1 remake in particular is incredible. Love Resident Evil 2, obviously, second favourite game. But Resident Evil 3 always just felt like the spin-off. But overall, Resident Evil 3 was still a good game. It wasn't, to me, it didn't really feel like much of a survival horror game. It kind of felt like it was a mercenaries mode with a tiny bit of story, which ironically, Resident Evil 3 was the first game to introduce mercenaries mode. The redesign of Nemesis seemed to be a huge talking point for returning fans of the game. It was overwhelmingly negative reception, but I, for one, initially I thought it was a bad redesign, but I think the old design wouldn't have really fit in properly with the background of the game. The original design, yes, is menacing and terrifying for all different reasons, but if you put that cartoonish element into a realistic setting, it will look odd. So it's kind of a flaw that I've overlooked and can accept. I'm not a purist. If it's not perfect, I will hate it. But some of the criticisms with Resident Evil 3 are valid. There is pretty much 2 puzzles in the entire game, and some levels are completely missed out, but that's where it ends with me. I think it's just because I wasn't so heavily invested in the game itself that it wasn't too much of an issue for me. I still had a lot of fun playing the game. It's fun. But Would I pick it over Resident Evil 2? No, never. But I think that's where the problem was. Resident Evil 2 is so story focused, and it always has been. And I think people, especially new fans, were expecting more from Resident Evil 3 when it just never was there. The focus in Resident Evil 3 has always been the action and the gunplay. It wasn't an action game overall, it was still survival horror and it had those elements, but its focus wasn't on the story, whereas Resident Evil 2 focused primarily on the story. But the question does remain, with the reception of Resident Evil 3 being kind of mixed, is the franchise heading towards the more action-oriented again when people don't want that? Or are they going to look at the success of Resident Evil 2 and focus more on the survival horror elements? For me, personally, I really hope that they go back to the survival horror roots. But we'll just have to wait and see. I'm hoping that the franchise continues to get back to its roots. I want to see the perfect balance between puzzles and survival. It just makes me wonder, what next turn will Capcom take the franchise? I'm really hoping that they listen to the reaction for 3 and possibly expand on it. Maybe release a further update, which I highly doubt that they will ever release an update to add things back into the game. But it would be nice just to appease those people that have had that reaction and were wanting more from the game. And I'm just going to wrap up the video here. Thank you for sticking with this video for this long. And like I said previously in the video, I am planning to do a retrospective of each individual game in the series, as well as the Silent Hill games. But that will take some time. But what were your thoughts on the future of the franchise? Let me know down below. If you please like and subscribe to the channel, that would be fantastic. Until next time, bye.